Do you know this guy? Very few people do, but he provided us with a metaphor to understand political diversity, which is really useful. I'd like to take it a little further, as I believe it can also help us diagnose and prescribe a solution to the primary illness that higher education suffers from. Joseph Overton suggested that we think of a window through which we can view a limited range of political opinions. Others remain outside in the peripheries. Those we can see are the ones that currently society views as acceptable. They are permissible to debate. Those outside of view are those that we label as fringe and do not believe should be given serious attention. This is the Overton window. The key to appreciating this metaphor is to understand that the window moves. What is mainstream today may not have been previously, and vice versa. A clear and striking example would be slavery. In 1850, in the United States, that issue was up for debate. There were strong feelings on both sides, but people could advocate publicly for slavery and not be viewed as fringe characters. It was a topic on the table for discussion. Today, it's clearly beyond the pale. A more recent shift can be seen with regard to gay marriage. A couple of decades ago, even on the left, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were insisting that marriage should only be between a man and a woman. At that time, advocating for gay marriage was not completely marginalized. I was doing it, but it was closer to the edge of the field of view. Today, things have shifted the other way around. Being opposed to gay marriage is more and more largely out of the mainstream discussion. A reversal isn't going to happen. And quite recently, of course, we're all now talking about socialism and how it has become mainstream. So, we see how the Overton window can shift one way or the other. It can also broaden or narrow depending on public opinion about various subjects. Now, we should be clear that Overton was being descriptive, not prescriptive. He was not telling us what should be in frame, only that there is a frame. While Overton was talking about political opinions and what policy changes are actually possible or actionable, I think we can make considerably more use of his metaphor. We can use it to speak of ideas that are viewed as mainstream or acceptable and how these vary when applied to subsets of the population. We could talk about California's Overton window or the Republican Overton window or higher ed's Overton window. Those would have different frames than a general American window. Now it's the third one, however, that I'd really like to focus on. Higher ed's Overton window. That would provide us with a very helpful tool to discuss and analyze and recommend university policies and practices. What views are viewed as acceptable for discussion within academia? This could help us operate according to the academic rigor that we all proclaim as the hallmark of our institutions. I sometimes hear people argue that colleges and universities should be places where students are exposed to all views. Of course, what we want is a range of views, not all views. First of all, we don't have time to get to all views. We have to choose. Second, there are some wackadoodle ideas out there for which colleges don't really need to provide a platform. I think what people want, at least people interested in exposing students to a genuine diversity of good ideas, is a range of speakers that is at least representative of the American mainstream. The higher ed Overton window should not be substantially different from the American window at large. This doesn't preclude the possibility of exposing students to fringe ideas. Not all fringe ideas are wackadoodle. Some have been right. But students should certainly be exposed to meaningful distribution of perspectives within the American Overton window. The problem is that many colleges and universities have shut out a lot of ideas that are simply right of center in the American window. Some schools have done this more than others, and some do buck this trend, but by and large, what we might call conservative perspectives are significantly muted in higher ed. Back when I was in college was when the big PC wave hit. We were all talking about political correctness. The issue, however, was not people's choice of words or being nice or polite. That's not what political correctness was. Rather, first starting with higher ed and then passing on into other areas of life, the Overton window slammed shut on one side and opened further on the other. Suddenly, views that were actually mainstream became verboten. Your politics had to be correct, where you would be silenced, shunned, or slandered. What was deemed acceptable in higher ed was no longer the American window of ideas, but a new window that tacked hard to the left, or from your perspective, to the left. Within the past 5 to 10 years, we've experienced another such radical and heavy-handed shift, often referred to as the Great Awakening. And again, the starting point was often higher ed. Stating that there are only 2 sexes, which was unquestioned until 15 minutes ago, could now have you labeled a transphobe. You could be doxxed or even lose your job. The same applied to criticisms of critical race theory. Expressing public support for the nation of Israel during the last couple of years became not just unpopular with certain groups, but could lead to harassment and violence. The point here is not which view on trans issues, race relations, or Israel-Palestine is right or wrong, but that views that were actually mainstream were labeled as being beyond the pale. While organic shifts in the Overton window happened, this was really about certain people with certain types of power reframing for everyone which views were acceptable and which were not. Many mainstream ideas were labeled as dangerous and hateful, and their adherents bullied into silence. Small groups of faculty and student life personnel took the lead, and administration either failed to respond or passively supported it. Now, why is this so harmful? 3 reasons. 1, you don't get genuine diversity of perspectives, and we need to consider multiple perspectives in order to better understand the world and how to live in it. As Hegel tells us, we need both thesis and antithesis in order to reach some synthesis and advance in knowledge. If an idea is marginalized because it has not withstood critical examination, fine. But if it's thrown out of the conversation by someone simply wielding power, not so fine. Slamming shut half of the Overton window as a power play is a good way to end up with uncritical, uninformed, and wackadoodle ideas gaining power on the other side. And we saw that happen quite a lot. Second, if people aren't exposed to mainstream ideas on one side of the spectrum, they are completely unable to respond to them. How can they succeed in the world when they think half of the people in the world are incomprehensible extremists? Again, it's not a question of who's right or wrong, but can you at least understand the people with whom you share a community? If you were taught just to label these people as extremists, you're not going to contribute well to any community in which you find yourself. Third, what happens when you exclude people from the conversation? They don't disappear. They may quiet down, but will bite their lip while slowly growing more resentful. That's not helpful. They may well become more easily radicalized. I think we're experiencing that right now from a lot of young men on the right, and that's not helpful. We lose touch with who and where they are. They grow more radical out of the sight of the rest of us. Telling reasonable people that they are unwelcome at the table does not make them join you. It does not make them disappear. It has a way of radicalizing them. And so the hyper-partisanship with competing wackadoodle ideas spreads even further. So, what is to be done? Actually, it's not that hard. First, if you're a professor, make sure you're exposing students to perspectives that cross the American Overton window, and maybe into its fringes. If you don't, you're not educating your students, you're indoctrinating them. Second, if you're one of the people on campus inviting speakers, do the same. It's natural that you'll want to bring in people with whom you agree, but you need to rise above that. Your primary obligation is the education of students. If you've never brought in someone with whom you disagree, especially when it comes to speakers who address political issues, consider doing that with the next speaker. Third, if you're not in the business of assigning books or inviting speakers, as is the case with most students, you need to hold others accountable. Let them know that you expect assignments and lectures to come from different perspectives. Tell them you want to hear other opinions. At the same time, be careful about chastising those who fail to provide such diversity. It is completely natural to want to assign readings and listen to people who say the things that we like. It's not how things should be handled, but it is completely understandable. And many of those folks want to be fair. They may just need a little prompting. I was fortunate enough to attend a Quaker high school. If you're not familiar with Quakers, they are a religious tradition heavily invested in both education and matters of justice. Politically, they generally fall on the left. One of the annual programs that the school ran was a week of learning opportunities that dealt with a particular nation. My first year was South Africa, and this was at the time of the apartheid regime. During my second year, it was Nicaragua. This was when the whole Iran-Contra affair was going on. The school planned a number of speakers to talk about the history and current situation in Nicaragua. However, all of these folks were coming from left of center. Some conservative students objected. Why are all of the speakers coming from the same side of the aisle? They demanded fair representation of different perspectives. And you know what the school did? They listened. They agreed. They recognized that they had made a mistake, and then they brought in a senior military official to offer a competing viewpoint. Our school officials hadn't wanted to be unfair. They had just done what was natural. But much to their credit, they listened when they were challenged to do better and corrected course. I don't think we need to assume hypocrisy on the part of others, but give them the opportunity to do the right thing. And if they don't, then hold them accountable. Okay, where does that leave us? Here's my takeaway in 4 points. Number 1, the Overton window is a good metaphor that allows us to refer to the range of acceptable political opinions at a particular point in time. 2, colleges and universities have an obligation to share perspectives from across that range, at least if they're committed primarily to the education of their students. 3, there is no obligation to bring in fringe perspectives, but they could be brought in at the school's discretion. And 4, when a school is not living up to this standard, students and employees should point it out and demand better of those whose job it is to ensure the education of the student body. But if they don't, draw attention to it until things change. That's how we improve higher education today. Thank you.